Hello, everyone. Welcome to Loving Out Loud, Learning to Love in a Hate-Filled World. This is chapter 13. There will be 16 total chapters when I'm finished, plus the introduction. The title of this particular class is Tom and Roland, Protectors in the Fray. If I seem a little tickled, it's because this is the second take, and I pretty well bungled the first one. So here you go, on into the class. Our theme scriptures this week are again from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7. Love always protects. You know, it's if you go through that love chapter, that love section in 1 Corinthians 13, the whole chapter is very educational when it comes to the concept of biblical love. But when you start to break down each individual characteristic, it gets even more interesting. And in this particular case, love always protects. And then from John chapter 15, verse 13, Jesus said, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." All right, keep those in mind as we move into the stories today. You know, there are heroes in the news every day. There are big time heroes, and then there are what I call everyday heroes. The big time heroes include people like the Marine who jumps on a grenade to protect his comrades. Or a few years ago, when I was writing the book, shortly before I wrote this chapter, there was a shooting in Noblesville, Indiana, I believe, and the teacher actually stopped the shooter. He took 3 bullets in the process to take the shooter down. He survived, but he was a hero. I think about as I was putting the class together for the materials together for this particular video, I was thinking about the first responders in the Twin Towers in, was it 2001, September 11th. After the first tower had collapsed, there were still firefighters climbing the second tower, and they knew that the second tower was in danger of collapsing because the first one had already fallen. And yet they continued to climb the tower, trying to save who they could save. Those are big time heroes. And then just as I'm recording this just a couple of days ago, Desmond Tutu, the Anglican Archbishop of down in South Africa, has passed away. And they showed a video clip of him charging into a mob to single-handedly save a man who was about to be killed. Not only that, but the man was probably very potentially a spy for the apartheid government. What a hero. What a hero would do that. But then we have what I call everyday heroes. Maybe the doctors and nurses who are on the front lines of COVID. They're heroes. We've been saying that a lot in the news, but in a very real way, they're fighting against life and death to save people's lives on the front lines of the COVID pandemic. Or how about the employee who stands up for a falsely accused coworker? Maybe someone accuses them of doing something they didn't do, and this other employee stands up and said, "No, that's not true. I know for a fact it's not true," and defends them. That's a hero. Maybe it's a friend who stops gossip from spreading just by saying, "Hey, cut it out." That's a hero. Or maybe it's a stranger who interjects slurs being cast at someone else, someone of a different race or someone of a different orientation. This person hears those slurs and interjects themselves and stops what's happening. Those are heroes. Those are everyday heroes. I'm going to share with you a couple of heroes that I've thought about over the years, people that made a real difference in my understanding of what it means to stand up for someone else. The first one I'm going to talk about is Tom. Now, before I get into the story, one thing you got to know about me is I've never been much of a fighter. If you go back and you listen to the chapter on Jimmy, bumblebees and forgiveness, you know that I went weeks and weeks being harassed and never retaliated, just simply because of fear. I was frozen by fear. Never been much of a fighter. I have another person in my family, very close person in my family, who was the exact opposite. He would basically, if someone started something with him, he finished it before it really got started. I've watched guys prance around and posture and kind of act big and bad, trying to mouth off and intimidate the other person. That didn't work with this other person in my life. Somebody started that, he just finished it right there. Boom, it was over. But I've never been much of a fighter. I've had one real fight my whole life. One real fight and a couple of scuffles in my entire in my entire life. So, but that almost changed in the fall of 1981. I was starting my second year at Williamstown Bible College, Williamstown, West Virginia. The thing you know about Williamstown Bible College, it was small, very small school. I think I mentioned it in the previous video. The complex consisted of the Christian school, or I'm sorry, the Bible College was across the road. The Williamstown Church of Christ was kind of the center of the I don't know what you would call it. I guess the center of the complex, in a sense. Behind Williamstown Church of Christ was Williamstown Christian School, and then across the parking lot was a cafeteria. And so we all kind of Williamstown Christian School students and Williamstown Bible College students and the members of the Williamstown Church of Christ, we were all kind of coming and going constantly from the complex. And we spent a lot of time there. At one spot over near the cafeteria, someone had put up a basketball goal. And it was not uncommon for some of us younger guys to be out there shooting hoops. There might be some of the Christian school kids and some of us younger Bible college kids. I know I was there. My friend Carrie was there, and Tom was there, and then there were a few others, and we were shooting hoops. And all of a sudden, there was a commotion that was kind of starting up, and across the parking lot was one of the Christian school boys, and he was being, well, he hadn't been punched yet, but he was being threatened by a larger boy who was not part of the Christian school, not part of the Bible college. He was just a kid from town, and he was taking issue with this smaller Christian school boy. I don't know why. I don't know if the kid deserved it. I don't know. It was probably over a girl, if I had to guess. But we were like, whoa, what's going on? Well, Tom didn't hesitate. Tom jumped in between the two and grabbed that slightly larger boy by the collar and basically intimidated him into backing off. He pulled his right arm back, actually a right arm that was injured when he was 3 years old and still suffered the consequences from that. But he held that boy off with his damaged right arm cocked back, ready to punch him, basically saying, give me a reason, give me a reason. I'm not doing it justice because it was a very serious situation. But he intimidated that boy into leaving the smaller boy alone. He interjected himself and prevented that smaller kid from being hurt. And he ran him off. He ran that town kid, he ran him off. We thought it was over. So we went back to basketball and we went back to shooting hoops and didn't think anything more about it. That was dumb. Because that boy returned, and he didn't return alone. He returned with reinforcements, much bigger reinforcements on motorcycles. There were many of them, and when we noticed them, they were standing out in the street between the church building parking lot and Roland Wise's house. Roland Wise lived in a small house just beside the parking lot of the church building. And he and his wife and his 2 daughters lived there. And just past their house were these boys on the motorcycles, much bigger boys. Did I mention they were bigger? And there were a bunch of them, and they were standing there making plans. They were looking at the group of us shooting hoops, and each one of them was picking one of us to take out. They were planning which one they would each take. Remember, I'm not much of a fighter. Now, I determined at that moment I wasn't going to run, but I got to tell you, it didn't look good for us. As the fact that we maybe were slightly older, we weren't slightly bigger. This was not looking good for us. After they took a few moments to figure out who was taking who, they started across Roland's yard toward us. And we're like, uh-oh, here we go. About that time, Roland Wise's back door opened, and he stepped out, walked around the edge of his house, and positioned himself between those boys and us, crossed his arms, and in a deep voice said, "Hello, boys." Now, Roland wasn't a little guy, but the other thing was he was a grown, mature man. It's one thing to take on a bunch of Bible college and Christian school boys, but it's another thing to take on a grown, mature man who knows what he's doing, and who is known in the community. And those fellas just stopped in their tracks, and they said, "Hello, Mr. Wise." And then they turned around and left. He interjected himself to our benefit in that case. Now, I'm sure Roland wasn't thinking about his example of self-sacrificing agape love when he headed toward his back door. I'm sure he wasn't looking out the window thinking, I need to give these boys an example of what it means to love one another. But that's exactly what he demonstrated. He stepped into the fray. Now, here's the thing is, he didn't know how it was going to turn out. There were a bunch of them, and they were good size. They could have taken him out and still come after us. Very, very possibly they could have. He didn't know what would happen, but he threw himself into the mix. A passage I want you to think about. It says, this is from the Message. The Message translation, well, anyway, it's from the Message. 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. It says, "There is no room in love for fear." I really like how this is worded. I think that's one of the cool things about the Message. It kind of puts the teachings into everyday language. It says, "There's no room in love for fear. Well-formed love banishes fear, since fear is crippling. A fearful life, fear of death, fear of judgment, is not one yet fully formed in love." Now, based on the passages that I've shared today, based on the example of Tom and Roland, I have two goals. Two goals I want to share with you, and I want you to think about whether or not you can make those your personal goals. Number one, be more and more willing to step into the fray and be a shield of protection for those who cannot protect themselves. And number two, not let potential damage to my reputation, my career, my church responsibilities, or even physical pain prevent me from protection or from protecting someone or anyone who might need my help. How can I claim to love others if I'm not willing to stand as a protector in front of them, even if they're my enemies? Here's your discussion questions. And before you say it, yes, I did see a typo in the previous screen. The discussion questions, here you go. Share about someone who is being hailed as a hero in the news. Number two, share about a time when someone stepped up to protect you. Number three, do you have more of a tendency to fight or like me, to avoid conflicts. Why do you think that is? What are some examples of how Christians could be more involved in protecting those who need help? How could we interject ourselves more? And then the last question, what keeps us from stepping into the fray? Should those things keep us from stepping in? Think about that. All right, it's time for the challenge of the week. Here's your weekly challenge. Being mindful of those you're around and interact with this week, look for ways to step in and be a protector. Okay, that's the message for this week. Next week, we talk about the angel in 22D. Now, the other thing I would like to say before I close out is I want to remind you the basic messages of each of these classes are found in this book, Loving Out Loud. And it is available on Amazon along with a companion workbook. The other thing I'd like to say is if you're getting something out of these classes, if they're meaning something to you, share the link on your social media. Share these classes with other people who you think might find them useful. Okay, guys. Thanks a lot. Next week, Angel in 22D. Take care.